Welcome to Out of the Fold. This episode is the final part of my conversation with Claire. If you haven't listened to the first two parts yet, please do so before listening to this one. There was a turning point, though, right? Like there was one time. Yes, everything is gradual, but at one point, you had to have been kind of questioning if you believe it all, and then at some point you said, "I don't really know what I believe, but if there's enough evidence of something, then I'd probably believe that, and so therefore I know that I'm not this, and I must be agnostic."
I think a large part of that turning point has to do with the family friend that I mentioned. We grew up together. She and I were each other's first friends. In the church nursery. We've been each other's best friends for a long time. She was going to be maid of honor at my wedding, but unfortunately was out of the country at the time and couldn't make it. But she was always an extremely spiritual person. Actually, the reason that she couldn't make my wedding is because she was overseas working as a missionary doing Bible translation. So always an extremely spiritual person, won a whole bunch of accolades in school for being the most spiritual out of our graduating class. And their whole family was like that, just really wonderful, caring, loving people, good friends. But the oldest daughter, and I'll call her Laura. Laura was always kind of an odd duck. Very, very, very sporty. They were all sporty, so we didn't think about that. They were all in multiple sports throughout our time in school. But Laura never really dated. She had a lot of interests that the others didn't really share. She started taking care of a lot of pets as she got into college and on her own. I remember her room in the family house always had at least 3 different lizard tanks in it and stuff. And I kind of wonder now, looking back on it, if she was trying to compensate for the fact that she wasn't allowed to love another woman, and taking that love that she felt and giving it to something that she could give it to. But Laura had kind of one spiritual crisis after another, and I remember hearing about it secondhand through my friend, her younger sister. "Oh, please pray for Laura. She's going through a really hard time. Please pray for Laura. She's feeling this or that." And then when we were when the younger sister and I were in college, Laura finally came out as a lesbian. And at the time, I still believed the idea that being gay was a choice, and that being gay broke God's heart, and that being gay was so obviously sinful and so obviously wrong, and people who are gay have turned their backs on yada. It goes on, yada yada. But Laura was, for the first time that I could remember seeing as we grew up, Laura was really happy, and she wasn't angry. She didn't hate God. She still went to church. She just had a girlfriend now.
Right.
But the family turned on her, and this was, these were people that I'd considered my own. I called their mom, growing up. These were people who were close as my own siblings as I grew up, and they just turned on her. I remember, my friend, the sister, made mention, like she always said, "Oh, Laura's bringing her friend," and I thought, well, it's not her friend, it's her girlfriend. No, it's her friend. They wouldn't invite. They would invite everybody's significant other to family functions except for Laura's. Or if Laura's girlfriend came, they made sure everybody knew that this is not Laura's girlfriend. And then, the engagement happened, and nobody mentioned it on Facebook. You know, they threw, you know, huge, big, elaborate deals both online and offline when the other siblings got married. But nobody mentioned it when Laura got engaged. I found out because, you know, I messaged her one day. I noticed like a ring or something, and I messaged her, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm getting married next week." And I'm like, "Holy crap! I didn't even know," you know.
Yeah.
And I asked my friend about it and said, "Hey, you didn't tell me that Laura's getting married." And she messaged me back, and she goes, "Yeah, we're all just heartbroken about it. I've been crying. I've been praying, asking God to intervene in her heart, but, you know, she's just made this decision to turn her back on God." I'm like, "No, she hasn't though. She's still a Christian. You know, I saw in a picture where she was wearing a sleeveless shirt, she had a big tattoo on her back of a Christian cross. I mean, granted it was in rainbow colors, but still." But just watching this family that I loved turn on her, and then not a single one of them attended Laura's wedding. And I asked my friend, I said, I know that you don't believe it, but, you know, this is your sister's wedding. You know, don't have a heart, you know, go show your sister that you love her. And she said, I can't. I just can't. And I said, "Can you send her a card? Can you send her a gift?" "No, that would be supporting it." And I was able to convince her to donate to a charity in her sister's name, and that was the most she was willing to do. And a few months after that, I came back to Indiana to visit some family, and I ran into Mrs. Smith at my parents' church, and I asked, you know, "How's everybody doing? You know, how's your husband? You know, how's, you know, your grandkids? How's this?" And she very, very carefully refused to talk about Laura.
Wow.
But this is her oldest child, you know?
Yeah.
The whole family's just pretending like she doesn't exist. And how can a God who is love, you know, the book of 1 John specifically says God is love. How can a God who is defined by his love cause us to hate each other so much, you know? And that was kind of a turning point for me, because I thought, maybe it's not wrong to be gay after all, because look how happy Lori is. You know, could a God who, you know, creates us so perfectly make Laura love another woman and then punish her for it? You know, it's exactly the same as you know, flavor preferences. I like pineapple, you know, on pizza, and, you know, my best friend doesn't, and it's not a sin. You know, how is it a sin to have a different preference for who you love, you know? And if young earth creationism, if I've already let that go, and if I've let go the idea that gay people are not sinners after all, you know, what other detrimental parts of this faith that I've been raised with should I let go of? And one by one, I kind of started to jettison these ideas that were holding me down. You know, I'm terrified of hell. Well, a God who loves us so much, is it really in his character to you know, put us on earth for 80 years and then punish us for all eternity if we don't believe exactly the right thing? Maybe hell doesn't exist, you know? Maybe the Bible isn't the perfect, completely inaccurate, inspired word of God. Maybe there's mistakes in it because people have translated it and people put it together. You know, maybe it's not as divinely inspired as we thought. And like one by one, you know, I'm kind of testing the waters and you know, just checking out what is it like for me to just let go of this belief. And it's man, it's really freeing. It's really freeing, because I I feel now as an agnostic, I feel less judgmental towards people, and I feel less sad at other people's decisions, and I feel more capable of loving people regardless, without expecting anything in return or without expecting that they're going to convert. I feel more involved in my own community, because I'm not going out and doing things for people, trying to sneakily get them to accept what I believe. Now I'm just doing it because that's what we should do. We should help people. We should donate to charity, and we should donate to food banks, not because we're trying to use it as bait to try and lure them into our way of thinking, but just because people are hungry and need to eat. I mentioned, I'm not atheist. I'm agnostic. I'm still. I still believe in some other higher power, but I don't expect anybody to believe the same way that I do, and I'm not convinced that I'm right. And I thought that going from having the answer, capital A, I thought that losing that would make me feel terrified in my daily life. I'd be afraid without you there to see me through. Imagine me without you. I thought that it would make me feel purposeless. And I thought that I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. But man, I feel really good. You know what? I don't have the answer, and that's totally fine. It's totally fine.
I think for me, it was kind of like, like Santa Claus. Like if you, and I don't mean like I'm in no way like demeaning religion in that way, just as a metaphor. It's like,
yep.
If you were to take Santa Claus out of Christmas, it's like, you might think, your kids are going to be miserable because Santa Claus is so great. But the flip side of that coin is that, hey, we got you this stuff because we love you and appreciate you. And like, isn't that actually really nice? Like, there's nothing awful about that. Like, it's just, hey, we just want a day to celebrate that we love you. So we got you this stuff, and there's no fat guy that did, we did this. And that's actually a really nice thing. So you had mentioned about the, that the evangelists and being a part of a religion in general, that you kind of do have these answers, and that is a really positive thing to a lot of people. So what are your answers now? Like what do you think does happen when we die? How do you explain things that that people have brought up as things that are divine? Like, when people claim that they've seen God, or, seen a light, or spoken to God, or anything like that. What are your answers for those things now?
Well, when people say God told me this, my red flags go up immediately, because now, I've had plenty of experience with people who've said God told me this. Mm-hmm. And they were either lying, or they genuinely believed something that wasn't there. And either way, for me, that was a terrifying implication, to be put under the authority of a potential husband, or a church leader, or whatever, or a Bible teaching colleague, who said, God told me this, and it's something that goes against what I've seen and what I know, what I have empirical evidence of. On the other hand, part of the reason why I'm not a flat out atheist is because I've also had experiences like that. I've felt a presence of love while looking out at the top of a mountain here in Washington State, and just seeing, how beautiful the world is. I've felt a presence of comfort, and I think I mentioned to you I have a chronic condition that, thank God is not nearly as bad as they were afraid it was going to be. But when I was diagnosed at age 20, and I thought my life was over, I remember feeling a very tangible presence of comfort that I can't explain. I don't have the answers, and I don't expect anybody else to believe what I believe because of what happened to me. But for me, that's enough to reassure me that God is not who I was taught that he was. God isn't even necessarily a he. God may be something greater than I can understand, but I believe in him, her, it, whatever. Again, because I've felt that presence in my own life, but I'm not 100% certain that I'm right, and I'm not saying that anybody else should believe what I believe because of it. And again, like I mentioned, I thought it would be terrifying to not have the answer. And honestly, it's okay. What really matters is kind of the Fred Rogers principle. I love you just the way you are, and there's no attachment to that. We should love each other, and we should help each other, and we should reach out to the less fortunate, but not because of any kind of spiritual mandate, but just because it's the right thing to do. Because whether or not God exists, whether or not any one religion is right, we can all agree that people shouldn't be hungry. We can all agree that people shouldn't be without clothes or without a place to stay. As for what happens when we die, I don't know. I wish I did. It would it would be nice to know, but I can tell you again, I no longer believe in a literal lake of burning fire hell. That just doesn't jive with the idea of a God of love and comfort to me. Heaven would be really nice. I hope that's real. But even if it's not, it's okay. The important thing is that we're here while we're here, and we do what we can, and we help each other, because God is great. He's a nice concept, but we have the hands that can positively and negatively affect the community around us. And it even says, going back to the Bible, it even says in the book of James, suppose one of you is without food or warm clothes, and if you say, oh, go be warm and well fed, what good is that? What good is the lip service? Mm-hmm. Go out and use your hands. It doesn't matter what you believe in. Go out and use your hands. Help the people around you.
Yeah. So I've always, when I lost my faith and everything, it was it was that same sort of not negative, very very freeing type of experience, and there is something. I think the thought of dying, and the thought of all that would happen is that my body would nourish the earth, and that would allow many millions of other things to live. Like that sounds nice. Like that sounds okay. Yeah. That doesn't sound negative to me at all. But if I walked out my door today and I get hit by a car and I wake up in a coma 3 days from now, and they say, you're gonna die the next time you fall asleep or something like that, some horrible type of situation, like that. I know that just from my Christian upbringing, with those schools and everything, despite the fact that I can actively say that I don't believe in it, I'm going to be worried about whether I was wrong. I'm going to worry about whether I was wrong about it being incorrect, and if I'm going to be going to hell because I didn't dedicate my life to Jesus for most of for forever. I'm wondering if you know, or if you couldn't know, but if you think that that is a similar situation that you're going to be in, or when you die, when we all die, or if there are still things also that happen in your life where like you would have prayed, or you would have done something where you would speak to God, and if you do something else in that stead, or if there are sometimes times where you do speak to something, and it gives you a similar feeling as it once did, it just isn't indoctrinated in the way that it once was.
I think that's a really good way to put it, is that it's not indoctrinated the way that it once was. I still pray. My husband and I have been talking about this a lot because we've both been kind of going through a similar journey. We don't look down on people who, bless the meal before food or before eating food or whatever. We don't. I still find a lot of personal value in prayer, but again, it's because, I still do believe in some kind of form of God, just not the God that I was taught to fear and to blindly love. As for, do I think I might, change my mind on my deathbed or something? I think it's very normal that you and I both still have that kind of twinge deep down of what if we're wrong? What if we're wrong? Because we've been indoctrinated, in that. I've been taught my entire life that hell is a literal place, and that people go there. Most people go there, and it's horrible. My parents have lived in the same little suburb in Indiana for the last 15 years or so, and they had a lovely neighbor across the street from them who recently passed away. Very, very sweet woman named Margaret. Margaret, unfortunately, like I said, passed, but she passed after a long, happy life with family and with loved ones around her. A long, happy life after kind of being the neighborhood grandma. When I heard about Margaret's passing, I called my mom and I said, "I'm so sorry. I know Margaret meant a lot to you." And my mom just broke down in tears and said, I just don't think that Margaret's in heaven. She wasn't a believer." And I thought, what kind of a God would take sweet neighborhood grandma Margaret and send her to hell, after a lifetime of baking cookies and passing out Halloween candy to the kids, If there is a literal lake of fire, hell, for the people who didn't believe exactly right, I don't want to be in that God's presence. I would rather be in the presence of the God who made the beautiful trees and showed up to give me a pat on the back when I needed it most after my diagnosis. But if it's the angry God who condemns people who didn't believe exactly the right way, I don't want to be with that God.
I get that. So it's like we're supposed to be good people just because it's good to be good people, not because you want to avoid hell. And the idea of being in the presence of a God that only wants you to be part of heaven because you agreed with everything and followed everything literally by the book. Hell is almost more acceptable than being in that heaven.
You know, it reminds me of that picture floating around online. It shows Jesus knocking at the door, and Jesus says, "Let me in." And the people inside say, you know, what for? And he goes, you know, to save you. To save me from what? To save you from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always wondered that. Like, we didn't do a ton of ministering, and you know, I do remember that we had some projects where we were told to go out and ask people about, you know, what they viewed God to be, and you know, I'm thinking, I just cringe when I think about, you know, the fact that I did that when I was a kid, like outside of a grocery store.
Yep.
But I've always been curious, you know, the idea of you know, you would go to hell if you have basically heard of Jesus and then reject Jesus. But like if you were to minister to somebody who has never heard of Jesus and went through, like, let's say 30 years of their lives, any other religion, and then you just say, you know, this is actually what's right. I mean, it's reasonable for that person to not believe that. So didn't you kind of just actually condemn that guy?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was taught growing up that everybody is either going to heaven or hell, and the only people going to heaven are the ones who have actively accepted Jesus. So, you know, those poor people, you know, out in the jungle who have never heard of Jesus before, they're all doomed. And I thought,
interesting.
What kind of a God would create those people and then put them in a place where they didn't have access to, you know, the saving message? That's not fair.
And I think what I'm referring to, and that's interesting that you were taught that view, even as, and where I went to school was not nearly as intense as where you went to school, but we had very similar things that happened. But there actually was one somewhat gray area, and it was people who had never heard of Jesus before. And it was like, you know, if you had just literally never heard the name Jesus, never knew about the Bible, Christianity, that my teachers would all say, we actually do not know what happens to those people. And then, but, you know, if they essentially, if they heard, you know, Jesus is our savior, if they heard that one time and said, nah, then, you know, they're going to hell. So that's really interesting. So you were raised that, like, that, I mean, that's terrifying. You're exactly right. That, like, if they were to be in some village that isn't connected to anything and they've never heard of anything relating to the Bible, that they are just doomed.
Yeah, the idea is that, and forgive me, I don't remember the verse or the reference, but the idea is that we were always told there's this verse in the Bible that says, like, you know, people should be able to know by looking at the splendor of the nature around them that they're, you know, that there is a creator with a salvation plan. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. You know, who's going to look at a forest and think, huh, there was a guy named Jesus about 2,000 years ago who was crucified for my sins.
Yeah.
Like, that's not fair, you know? And
Right.
I remember in high school emailing the pastor of Pawnee Baptist and saying, you know, hey, can you kind of explain this for me? And he couldn't. He had no answer for it. It's just crazy. But, you know, that leads back into that good old Christian guilt that, you know, these people are going to hell. Why aren't you being a missionary? You know, there's a huge emphasis on you know, outreach and ministry and evangelism, because it's my responsibility to make sure that these poor people have the opportunity to be saved. And we heard, you know, all these hypothetical stories growing up of, you know, when you go to heaven and stand at the throne of judgment, you know, what if God shows you all the people that you could have reached and didn't, you know?
Hmm.
So, like I said, my best friend growing up is currently, as we speak, deep in the jungles, creating written language for people who have none, which is cool, but, also to push, literal Bible literalism on them, which is not so cool. So,
Wow.
It's a give and take.
What are your political beliefs now, and how have they changed since you've changed spiritually?
I was always raised to be Republican. I didn't know the difference between Republican and Democrat for a very long time, but we were always taught that the Republicans stand up for Jesus and the Democrats are all godless baby killers. I believed that for a very long time. And unfortunately, Eagleton, the school where I taught, pushed that view on their students as well. I remember the kids were up in arms the night after Obama was reelected. And I had to keep my mouth very firmly closed that I had voted for him because I was afraid of losing my job. But the night after Trump's election, I had already left Eagleton School, and I had already moved out to the Seattle area, but I was still friends with a few of my former students on Facebook, and it broke my heart to see how many 16 to 18-year-old kids were posting things on Facebook that oh, thank God, we've got a Republican back in the office, Trump is God's chosen. And one girl did a red, white, and blue makeover on herself to celebrate, the country getting back on track to, its godly roots. And it just broke my heart. I remember my mother saying, well, I believe that Trump is a baby Christian, were her exact words. And I was trying to say, Mom, the man is xenophobic and sexist and a braggart, and he's all these things that Jesus said not to be. But, he's a Republican, so, woo, good. He's definitely God's chosen.
Yeah, I mean, so I can sort of see how more evangelicals were really connected to Bush, but I'm really still very surprised about how much backing evangelicals are giving Trump. I have no explanation for it.
It's heartbreaking. I'm not willing to vote, blue across the board. I want to sit down and research and understand, people that I'm supporting. Why am I supporting them, and what do they stand for? Which, again, I find has become a lot more on the liberal side. But the rhetoric back in the Bible Belt is very, very strong that the Republican Party is God's chosen, and that anybody other is godless. And again, it goes back to that binary: red or blue, good or evil, black or white.
So that's all it is. Yeah, that makes
sense.
That's
all it is the binary, because again, they've been taught not to see in shades of gray.
For a few days, I debated leaving in any mention of Trump. I don't want potential guests who voted for Trump to feel like they aren't welcome. You are welcome. This is a show about people who have left religious communities. It is not about people of a specific political party. If you don't believe me, listen to the interview with my next guest. The reason I ask my guests about their political views is because they tend to be affected by religion. Take sex education. There are 34 states that mandate HIV education, but only 24 states that mandate sex education, and only 13 that require the information to be medically accurate, whether sex ed is mandated or not. In the 24 states with mandated sex ed, contraception is only required to be covered in 19, and of the 34 states with mandated HIV education, 27 are required to stress abstinence, and only 20 are required to cover condoms specifically. Of the states with the most abstinence-based regulation, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Utah are also states with the highest concentrations of people who self-identify as highly religious. Mississippi, Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Alabama are also some of the states with the highest rates of chlamydia and gonorrhea, and Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Tennessee all are among the states with the highest rates of teen pregnancy. It's disturbing to see this kind of correlation. Even when I identified as a Christian, I felt sexual health was important. Learning how a vagina worked didn't immediately turn me into a ravenous sexual deviant, and I always thought there was value in having as much information as possible. I wanted to know about sex as much as I wanted to know about trees, music, and Jesus. I believed premarital sex was sinful, but I never believed people who had it inherently deserved unintended pregnancy or disease. So if condom use was also sinful, then I was willing to accept the sin of knowing how to use one if it meant that others did too. My love for others always overwhelmed my fear of punishment for sin, which was always between humans and God anyway, not humans and other humans. This is where the purity movement misses its mark. There seems to be little acknowledgement of the fact that no matter how many pledges someone takes, or how strongly Christian someone's community is, or how great someone's parents are, sometimes people you love make decisions that are different from the plan. When that happens, lack of education means that it is likely to happen unsafely. If we say that the odds of a teen in the purity movement having premarital sex are 1 in 10 million, which is a very low assumption according to the STD and teen pregnancy rates, but this is just to make a point, you're saying that you are willing to sacrifice the safety of one kid out of every 10 million for the sake of everyone not having complete information. Education of all sorts is not supposed to be about making sure every Christian is comfortable, but about making sure every kid has a chance for a future. And there is nothing wrong with being taught that abstinence is a method of avoiding STDs and unintended pregnancy. But when parents vote for it to be the only sex education, they're not voting to protect their kids. Along with the fact that not even half of our states mandate sex education in public schools, private schools, for the most part, are not required to abide by state regulations. So, while in highly religious states that means that a private school could teach comprehensive sex education, it also means that private schools in non-highly religious states could choose not to teach comprehensive sex education. I couldn't find an exact percentage of total schools, both public and private, that teach sex education in the United States, but some of the most religious states are also those with the lowest income, and private schools in less religious states are unlikely to have massive markets of students who come from parents who don't want their children to have comprehensive sex education, so I don't know how this would skew the data. There are mental health risks to abstinence-only sex education as well. Activist Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped at age 14 from her home in Salt Lake City, Utah in 2002. She was held captive for 9 months, during which time she was raped repeatedly by a religious delusional, with support from his wife. Sex education classes she attended compared people who are sexually active prior to marriage to chewed up pieces of gum, and she has attributed this lesson to her lack of self-worth at the time, which she had said caused her to question screaming for help. She is now an advocate for sex trafficking survivors and a fierce critic of educational practices that make children more likely to become victims. She has maintained a strong faith through her life, and she is not the last religious devotee who will be spoken of highly on this show. This concludes part 3. I encourage you to do your own research on the information in this show. Please feel free to contact me if you'd like to contest any of its content. My next interview will be with Morris, a former Mormon. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe, comment, review, and share. If you'd like to be interviewed for Out of the Fold, feel free to contact me on Twitter at OutFoldPodcast, or you can email me at outofthefoldpodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks once again to Claire and her husband for approving all of this conversation being shared. All production and music by me. Talk soon.